I suspect you know that better than
It is. Certainly is.
Well, look, I think we're probably due to get going. It's 9. I'm just trying to make certain that I have got a quorum here. Folk, I think I have I? Josh, how are you? Riet, I can see. Pat, I've seen.
We've got an apology from Terry today, Bruce.
Terry's unable to make it, Riet. Thank you for that. Look, I'm going to make a start and suggest that I think we're okay there. I think last year, November, I was with you, folk. It's be nice to have been there today for a whole bunch of good reasons about actually how an audit risk committee operates most effectively. But having said that, we make best by meeting on Zoom. So I do wish you all well for today, and I hope we have a great meeting, and we'll get ourselves going. So, look, can I just check firstly, we are recording live now. If I could just get that confirmed, please.
Yeah, that's correct, Bruce, and I can confirm we've got a quorum.
Brilliant. Josh, I'm wondering, could I invite you, please, to start with the Karakia? If it's fair to load that onto you, I'd love you to start if you could, please.
Real happy to there, Bruce. Mōrene te whānau me noi tātou. I o ngā mano a tēnei te whakamui matatu ki a koe mo tēnei huhu ngā mātou. Arahina mai ki au ki te tika, ki te pone a mātou. A tukua mai tō wairu a tapu hei manaki, hei āwhi hei tiaki hoki a mātou. Anei mātou e tōhu nea mui tō aroaro, a ka tuku I tēnei ino I rongi tingo tō mātou kai whakora I Ukraiti. Āmini.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for that, Josh. Appreciate that start. Apologies, we have one from Terry. Are there any others that we need to allow for? People are able to stay the course of the meeting?
Bruce, I just sent my link on to Sandra. Sandra, you'll just need to have it change your name. Sandra usually joins us.
Yes.
You can get a link. So Sandra, if you just change your name.
Oh, that's great. Welcome, Sandra. It's superb.
Have we heard from Andy?
No, that's a very good point. Yeah.
I'll text him.
James, we do have a quorum, don't we? Just I better just check one final time.
Yes.
Yep.
No, we're good. Okay. Well, look,
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the apology from Terry Sheldrake since it's been raised by Councillor Stoltz.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Pat. Thank you for a seconder there. Larry, I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Andy's here. Andy's just turned up.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was on there, but not as a participant. It had me as just in viewing for something, so I'm here now.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, we'll make it for lateness, but it's not. It's probably a bit unfair. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I heard all about the Sutherland weather.
Well, look, in that case, I think it's fair, Pat, with your agreement that we don't need to sustain that apology, because Andy, you've been here all the time, which is tremendous. Are there any matters on the agenda that people need to raise their interests for? There being none, can we go to the confirmation of the non-confidential, the open minutes of the 23rd of November 2021? I'll move from the chair that they be accepted as a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yep, I'll second.
Is there any matters of accuracy or other that people need to raise over these minutes? Oh, Pat, thank you. Appreciate you using the hand. That's great.
Thanks. We're having lots of practice, I can tell you, at Zoom meetings, so we've got used to that. On page 6, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to know if the item with respect to the development of the formalised woody debris emergency response plan. What is the stage of that? Because it's not really clear where that's got to. And the second item on the same page, requiring proof of vaccination passports. What has been done about around this, allowing for the public to participate, and what stage are we at? There's it's the third bullet point from the bottom of the page.
Yes.
we're talking about council can support non-vaccinated persons to participate in a way that respects our employees. And I absolutely get that. And we've had some offline conversations about that. But I think it's timely to get a response in the public domain to, what we're doing at the moment, just so that everybody is in the public are clear about that. Thank you.
So 2 things. One, I wonder if I could get a response at this point to the woody debris policy. Pat, I'm wondering if it naturally raises its head under health and safety if we were to have that discussion on COVID under the health and safety agenda. Sure.
Yes.
If you're comfortable with that.
Happy to.
So certainly pick me up if I fail to honour that when we get to that item. Is somebody able to help us over the woody policy direction of travel and finalisation?
So through you, the Chair, Deanne Sutherland here, Acting Livable Communities Director. The methodology for the project is currently being developed, with the key role being the project manager for the woody debris project, which is coming to call for approval next week.
Brilliant. Thank you, Deanne. So sorry, that was coming to where? To council?
Coming to a leadership team for approval for that role for the project manager.
Right, okay, and I presume then there'll be some further communication with councillors.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, Pat, are you comfortable with that?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other matters of accuracy or correction that I need to note? That being the case, I'll put the motion, please, that we accept these as a true and correct record. All those in favour? I need to always remember which meeting. Will we raise hands, or do we have to use the function?
Did anyone move them, Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Yes, I moved them. I moved them, and
right.
seconded. Yes.
Well,
Sorry. So do we use the? Sorry, we raise our hands.
No, we raise our hands.
Please raise your hands. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Pat, you've already raised one matter which wasn't on the action sheet, and we've covered that off. And there's another one. The other matter on the action sheet, item 3.2, is the draft insurance strategy and REC removal cover. I noticed that by the time we get down to the insurance strategy update, that matter is dealt with there. So again, if members are happy to, we'll defer the clearance of that till we get to the relevant item within the agenda.
Yep.
Right, I just need to get back to my agenda, make certain that we're following right form. I have item 4, no requests for leave of absence or indication of needing to acknowledge or tributes to the community or people. I've received no indication that we have public wishing to have input or raise petitions, nor do I have any notice of extraordinary business or notice of motions. And as far as I'm aware, from the committee's function, we're not carrying any adjourned business into this, nor do I propose that we deal with that. Sorry, that we adjourn anything from this particular meeting. So that gets to the substantive part of our meeting and reports from the Chief Executive and the staff. First up is item 10.1, which is the audit plan, or the annual report audit plan. And it's great to have our guests here in the form of Stuart and Lauren. Our auditors, Stuart's new, and I guess we'll give him a chance. But Pauline, before we invite Stuart to address the committee, is there anything you'd like to say to the paper, please?
Through you, Chair. Just to say that most of it's covered within the covering note. Just welcoming Stuart, who replaces Dave Borwick, and Lauren is also back this year, so appreciate that. There is, as you will see, there is perhaps only one matter of focus in this one that was different from last year, and that's just our consolidation process. But apart from that, there's nothing else to raise as a separate issue.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Stuart, Lauren, welcome to the meeting. I've given you a general invitation to the meeting, which would be standard for our external audit, but in this, obviously, very keen to hear from you. Stuart, perhaps if I could invite you a few introductory words about yourself that would be appreciated, as well as going through your plan.
Thank you, Chair, and nice to meet everybody, all the members of the council that are part of the committee and members of management who I haven't met. I'm sure I will meet you in due course, and I apologise profusely. Well, I can't really help myself for not being in Gisborne to meet you all today. But my name is Stuart Much. I'm a partner at Ernst & Young. I'm taking over from David, not because we've moved him on in any way or form. He has finished his 6 years rotation as the appointed auditor on behalf of the Auditor General of Gisborne District Council, and the Auditor General's policies are that partners are rotated to bring in fresh minds, to have a fresh look at things from a different perspective. However, to support me in terms of maintaining the continuity of knowledge and the continuity of the team, Lauren, to my left here, is going to continue on as the manager on the audit engagement. So that you know, I've got reasonably long experience in the local government space. Bruce will probably be able to attest to this, but that's sort of coming up to about I don't know, 26, 27 years worth of auditing experience in the local government space. The most recent audits that I've done, I've looked after Porora City Council, Central Hawke's Bay District Council, Wairoa District Council, and actually we're just taking on all the councils on the west coast of the South Island, where I'll carry out a bit of a sort of second partner role on a couple of those engagements. So reasonably comfortable with operating in the local government space. Also do work in central government, but also in the private sector with clients ranging from Port and Napier through to Ministry for Primary Industries, through to Trade Me, through to AMP. So just a variety there. Look, enough about me. Our audit plan. So we've presented our audit plan, which is probably reasonably consistent, sort of key areas of focus from last year. I'll ask Lauren to talk to a couple of areas, and then we're more than happy to sort of take any questions or queries from the members. But the key for me as we look at this is whether there's anything that the members of the committee might think is missing in action. What are you really conscious of that you would like us to really have in the front of our minds as we take on the audit during the course of this year? Lauren, do you want to just touch on a couple of things?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stu. So two areas that we really wanted to draw your attention to. The first is infrastructure assets on page 3 of our plan. This is really a key area of focus for us because all infrastructure assets are being revalued in the current year. We're cognizant that the supply chain impacts of costs of assets, so we'll be interested to see how they're reflected in the revaluations at 30 June. The other area of infrastructure assets that we're interested in is just noting there's a significant number of capital works projects underway in the council, being the Olympic Pool, wastewater treatment plant and Waipawa flood control. So we'll focus on the capitalisation of these costs of the projects, as well as the project progress to date, comparative to budgeted spend, as well as time. We're also interested in the monitoring of those projects in line with the funding received and the related funding conditions. The elephant in the room, I guess, is we'll maintain a watching brief on the Three Waters updates as these progress and work with council to assess any impacts that this might have at 30 June. The second area that we wanted to draw your attention to was on page 4 around the grants and subsidies. So council has received a number of different types of grants in 2021 to support areas of roading, the Olympic Pool and wastewater treatment plant. Each of these funding types is subject to different funding conditions and required reporting. So we'll focus our review on the appropriateness of revenue recognition of these projects in line with the progress of the projects and the accounting standard. And we're also interested in how those revenue recognition and progress of the projects are being monitored by council.
Thanks, Lauren. I mean, so that a lot going on in the district, a lot of money coming into the district to focus on sort of really significant projects. The other thing that, as Pauline mentioned in her intro, that we've got an increased sort of focus on the consolidation, and obviously we're also responsible for the audit of Gisborne Holdings Limited, which is going through some changes or some reassessments at this time. So we'll be conscious of that as we go forward. So that's probably enough from us, but happy to take any questions in regards to our plan or any other matters committee members would like to bring to our attention.
Thanks, Stuart and Lauren, and again, welcome to the meeting. It's great to have you guys here. I see Riet first, and then I think Larry. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning, Stuart. Good morning, Lauren. Lovely to have you join us, even though it's virtually. One thing that struck me, the audit plan is quite standard. We know what we're looking for, but one thing that stood out for me is that in this audit plan, we're not taking COVID into account, which I know up to now has been a big issue. My concern is that it will still be a lingering issue for us in time to come. Is it just not a focus point, but it will still be taken into account? Because I see it mentioned here. So that just caught my eye, and I thought I would just raise that with you.
Yeah, I suppose there's possibly a risk that we almost think COVID's business is normal now, which we'd like to think it wasn't. And so how does COVID impact the audit and yourself? I mean, obviously, well, first of all, the most important thing is looking after the community. We're obviously conscious of anything that the council's doing to support its community during COVID, during the current rise in cases through Omicron. And so what might we be looking for there is in terms of how the council responds to that or reflects on that within its annual reporting, and what steps it's taken. So if you were to provide additional information in your annual report about how you've supported the community, we'll be conscious of that. A key thing with all the disturbance going on in the world, not just COVID, but in terms of matters associated with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the supply chain issues, cost pressures. The whole world is in relative turmoil at the present time. And so as a consequence of that, you've got significant cost increases and other pressures. So that we sort of flow that through the impact of that and the consideration of, say, inflation measures all the way through everything that we look at. And then just in terms of operationally, in terms of us being able to come and do your audit, I mean, we're conscious that you've got a council election this year. You'll be quite keen, I would imagine, to have your annual report signed off by the election date. That is the timeline. The achievement of that is the timeline that we're agreeing with Pauline and the team. We're pretty good at working remotely, but ideally we'd be working locally. So we'll see how we go.
Thanks for that.
Thank you, Riet, for your question. Larry, and then I think I've got Pat and then Andy.
Yeah, thank you for that. One thing that I don't think has been covered, I just would like to have a bit of a discussion about it, and that's the impacts of under-resourcing that we've got, and particularly in our consenting area. Obviously, resourcing is a problem for a lot of councils, getting the right staff at the right time, but we're going for a real dramatic period at the moment where we're losing staff, not being able to replace them, and particularly in our consenting area. And I would like to know what the impacts are of project delays in our community, the cost it is to the community of those project delays, and our reputational risk that is involved with that. We have put out a public statement to the community to say that we are under-resourced and there is problems, but the reality is when it hits home with project delays and the cost that it is to the customer, then it starts to become very serious. So I think that's a risk that we should be identifying a bit more, I think.
Yeah, thanks. That is certainly the sort of situation that many councils are facing. And I suppose we look at that and sort of says, where are we going to sort of see that reflected through the annual report? I always like councils and any organisation that are having challenges to be sort of upfront about things. And so if project objectives are not met, or if performance measures are not achieved in terms of, say, consent timeliness and those sort of matters, then what I like to see is that council reflect the true result, and our job is to ensure that it's as true as possible, and that you're open about what you're doing to mitigate those risks and the steps you're taking. So, if performance objectives are missed, well, then they are missed. But what's important to a reader, in my mind, is the clear articulation of the steps council's taking to remediate those issues so it doesn't keep happening. Now, sometimes some things are outside of council's controls, but it's around that messaging that you include in your annual report, and we'll be looking to provide feedback to management around the integrity and effectiveness of that messaging.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for being with us for the audit report. And mine really is just a follow-up from what was raised by the Mayor. And so are we likely to see, and can you please look for, so that it's clear to the public, what the financial impact of business as usual under COVID? Because aside from the points you raised, auditors, as with regard to what we might have done for the community, that is one thing. But the other thing is that it is a significant impact financially on the business of GDC and completing our BAU, which is partly what Andy was raising, but it's directly as a result of COVID, that the world is not the same as it was. The workforce are at home. I would just drive by as I've come to the council today because I need to be in here for something else later. You know, the whole pile of vehicles are in our yard. So all those kind of things that impact on business as usual need to be reflected, I think, in our audited report. And it is the impact of COVID on being able to operate.
And I think that's a good tasking or a discussion for management to consider. As your auditors, you know, we're more than happy to talk with management as to how they may achieve some reporting in that sort of space. And yeah, obviously we would be keen that any messaging that's put into the annual report is appropriate. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure whether management has sort of considered some separate reporting that specifically identifies how, you know, how much COVID is impacting Gisborne District Council both operationally and financially. Have to reflect that to management, that one.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Pat. Andy.
Yeah, thanks for that. We've spoken about the impacts of, or the uncertainties around Three Waters and COVID. The other smaller uncertainty we've got is the kiwifruit revaluations, or what's going to happen with those. Have you had a look at potential impacts with those decisions?
We have, you know, I've obviously had some discussions with management. I've read the papers associated with the decision and the decision to appeal. I understand that the Valuer General, or LINZ, is supporting the appeal of that finding. Ultimately, depending on timelines, we may go through 30th of June with you having, you know, being in the position of still haven't seen that appeal decision. Sure. So from an immediate perspective, it's around appropriateness of disclosures and financial statements and whether an obligation to return those rates exists at 30th of June. And then sort of subsequent to that, as you go into your annual planning round and your rate strike for the 22-23 year, you know, how are you going to flow that into your impact, into your rates assessments and the valuations that you use for your rates? So again, I know that it's something that management have at the front of their mind, and it's sort of something that we will look at from a sort of integrity of the sort of financial reporting perspective at 30th of June.
Thanks for that. I thought it would fall into next year more. Cheers.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate that. I just wonder, are there any other, I have got a couple of questions and perhaps some comments to make, but are there any other questions that members would like to raise at this stage before I talk? Can't see any hands up. Look, I think, Pauline, if I could perhaps address my comments to you, but actually it has a flow-on effect, clearly, Stuart, for the, I keep calling you Stu, I'm too informal, sorry, Stuart, about the audit. And that is that in effect, what I'm taking from the membership, and I would certainly support this, is that in terms of the audit focus, the disclosures that we intend to put in our annual report, and there must be disclosures in here, is actually a matter of significance for the elected members. That actually we're recognising that now in the current year that we'll be reporting on, COVID is having a very real impact, and that should be reflected in a relevant way in terms of the annual report. So, Pauline, I wonder if you could offer a comment to the committee about any preliminary thinking. It probably is preliminary, but preliminary thinking around the sorts of disclosures that you might intend. And I'm hearing from the committee that it's not just levels of service we have or we haven't achieved and it's been affected by COVID, but actually I'm hearing from the members the desire for, I'll use the word carefully, but a comprehensive statement about what is the real impact on us, which includes cost, includes staff, and the likes. Is there thinking, or can we put a flag up that we'd like that sort of discussion to be embraced in the annual report, Pauline?
For the Chair, yes, definitely. Last year we did it in 3 places. We basically had a little bit in the overarching financial summary. What was the impacts of actually physical dollars that were spent, but we also had a separate section that actually highlighted COVID and what was the implications. I believe those kind of disclosures, where they will come, they will still continue, and then there probably may be a third, a little bit note within the financial section as a separate disclosure. So there will be 3, and that comprehensive, if there's another summary that goes into the forward as well as those impacts. So it will be a thing that goes through, but we will address it as such. And similarly, anything with regards to kiwi fruit or anything, those disclosures, if it is a contingent liability or thereafter, or as a consideration, will be noted within our disclosures for the annual report.
Look, that's brilliant. I'm not necessarily suggesting, Stuart, that you go back now and change your audit plan, but if you and Lauren could just reflect the sentiment, and in fact, I think the well thought through comments of the committee in terms of the sorts of disclosures. So I take your point that it's for us as the reporters to consider what we report and how we do it, but it's certainly, I hope, clear from the meeting that we'll be keen that, you know, part of your audit effort would be a reflection on actually have we fairly reflected the impact of COVID, which despite somebody's opening comment is sort of feels a bit like business as usual, is still nevertheless a very real impact on where we anticipated being in the course of this year. So I think that's helpful. Look, the other thing, Stuart, that you mentioned, which I just want to reflect for members, which is really important, is both Pauline and the team and Stuart are working to a pre-election sign-off, which is good merit. Stuart, you noted that indeed COVID itself could affect us both within the team and preparing accounts, or indeed you guys in terms of doing the actual audit work. I'd just leave an injunction, please, if there's any indication that that date cannot be met, I'd love an early warning for elected members, because we will need to put 1 or 2 things into play if it's going to be a post-election sign-off. But at this stage, thank you that you and Pauline are working towards that. That's a tremendous sign. And look, the other thing I would just note for members is, and I'm just looking at the executive summary of the plan, that the fee is not a matter of debate for this year. It will be after this year when Stuart, I suspect, will come back to us with a proposal for the next 3 years. So that's already set. So with that, are there any other final comments members would like to make at this stage? Stuart, are you and Lauren, you're comfortable with direction of travel on those comments that we have made today?
I think that's really useful comments from members of the committee. And so what I'm really hearing is that when we report back to Council ultimately in September, we specifically articulate, what we've seen and heard in regards to COVID and some thoughts about how you've reflected that into the annual report. And we'll work with Pauline and the team as they do that.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you for that, Stuart. And so, sorry, I should have mentioned this before in my comments, and I'll come to you in a quick tick, Pat. You noted, by the way, the inflow of central government money. I presume that you have or you will make good contact with our internal auditors, because we have done a substantial amount of work, and that will be coming up later in our paper, in our papers around managing claims and the relationship with our funding partners. So I'm sure if you haven't, you will take that into account as you do the work. Pat, you've got a point to make, please.
I'm happy to move the paper be noted, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate that. Is there any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please raise their hands. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Lauren. You're welcome to watch if you wish, or I can also appreciate that you might have to move off. Internal audit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Internal audit, paper on internal audit, and it's Tina, or is it Melanie? I'm not certain who's talking to us today. Tina, by the looks of it. Thank you. Melanie.
Kia ora koutou. I'll take the report as being read. Basically, the main highlights of that report are the ERP system. So internal audit will be part of the project team for the implementation of phase 1 for the new enterprise resource planning system that will be replacing Ozone. Being part of the design and setting up of the financial modules in the new system will allow us to configure the system with appropriate workflows. So we have internal controls in place to determine separation of duties. Correct financial delegations are in place for the right authorisation levels. As this is a critical risk to ensure it's set up correctly with auditable trails throughout, this is going to be the main focus for internal audit for at least the next 6 months. External grant funding. Support will continue to be provided for each of those major project teams that receive external grant funding from our management accounting team during this time. Māori freehold land. We've been working with the revenue team to develop 2 new processes, which were completed and documented following the changes made to the local government Rating of Whenua Māori Amendment Act in July last year. So these will allow applications to make unused Māori freehold land unrateable, and also applications to write off rates arrears for uncollectible debt by the Chief Executive as well. And finally, the RITS implementation, as recommended by the Waka Kotahi audit in 2020, a new ticketing system is going to be implemented on our city buses, which will allow greater visibility and reporting abilities. We have been working with a consortium of approximately 9 councils around New Zealand that are currently using the system, and we're looking to go live with this on the 2nd of May. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tina. Appreciate that, and reflects a good level of activity going on. Do we have questions for Tina at this stage in terms of the work, the results today? Yes, Larry.
Yeah, I just got one question. I'm on page 29, number 9, about East Coast Road rock contract to purchase rock due to finish in May, with physical works expected to finish in August 22. Is this with the new current situation with East Coast Road, with the big, huge slip? Is that included in this, or is this previous to that?
Through the chair. Thank you. Yes, that'd be great. Thank you, Tay.
Through you, Chair, that's a separate piece of work. So that's the PGF works that goes from about the 6 kilometre mark out to about 15. We're doing works along through there. So it's completely separate from the bluffs. The bluffs were excluded from the funding from the Provincial Growth Fund. They're from the 18 to the 19K. So it's a different stretch of that road.
Okay, so that doesn't have any implication at all with with the whole road at all. It's just, this is a separate project and a separate part of the road, even though the other part is totally closed. yeah, it still work as usual.
So through you, Chair, the road is extremely vulnerable for quite a considerable distance along. So this here is the bit that is further back towards the Te Araroa end. We're working there at the moment. There's a number of areas where it's down to one lane, or we have barriers up for people going through paddocks. Oh, sorry, not through paddocks, but we've cut in towards the edge of the road edge for people to get around. The 19k bluffs were excluded from the funding because the business case wasn't there for that as it went through the Provincial Growth Fund. We're going to have to come up with a completely different option when it comes to the 19k bluffs as to what we're going to do out there. It's a very separate piece, and the team are working on what a long-term solution looks like, which we'll be bringing back to Council and to Waka Kotahi as to what our next steps are out there to maintain access.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for that, David. Appreciate your input. Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is to David, because I hear locally that the road is open again. Is that true?
So through you, Chair, the road's open to residents only and is four-wheel drive access only. So there are barriers up that explain that it's resident access only and that we don't want tourists out there. And saying that, we have people on electric bikes riding around the beach at low tide to go out to East Cape, even though East Cape Lighthouse is closed as well. So we've been in constant contact with the whānau that are out there, in particular the kōheres. They don't want people out there. It's not safe. We don't want people out there either. So it very much is trying to keep the public out of there, but the residents are able to come and go at this stage.
Thank you very much. Supplementary, because I do know of someone who thought they were taking visitors to the East Cape Lighthouse, and I was surprised. Would it be a good idea if we have another press release about the status of the road and that it is still closed for the general public and from a safety perspective?
So through you, Chair, we're working on a release at the moment once we know what some of the timeframes are going to be on. So we were timing our next one around that to say that this is when it's going to be, but we're happy to put something else out to say that, just to remind people it is still closed.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Pat, and appreciate that, David, taking advice. So Josh and then Riyadh. Josh, you got your hand up?
Yeah, just making sure that I've got my questions in order, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Well done.
I just have one question. It's about the reporting back. Like, how? Thank you very much for your presentation there, Tina. How will staff be reporting back about the risks in regards to? Well, I'm particularly interested in the replacement of our electronic system to replace Orbit, whatever its name is. But I mean, more broadly, how will we? What will I be expecting in regards to reporting back around risks of non-delivery? That these not coming to fruition. Like, will those be reported back to this committee on a 6-monthly basis, meeting basis, that kind of thing?
Through the Chair, are you talking in relation to the replacement of the ERP system?
I'm personally interested in that, but I'm meaning more broadly in regards to all of the things that have been identified on our audit update. Will they be kind of being reported back in terms of risk collectively together, or will they be projects? Like, that's why I haven't specifically drilled down into what it will be, because it's more the general question about how will these be reported back by staff? When should I be expecting the risk reporting to come back in regards to these projects?
Through the Chair, in relation to all of the different areas that are covered in the report, as they progress, there's an attachment to that report that gives you a status of where each of those projects and reviews are at. And as they progress, that will be updated, and any completed items and high-risk items or things that need to be addressed will be referred to in the report that's presented at each meeting. Sorry.
Oh, so collectively together, not as individual projects?
Depends which project you're referring to. Sorry.
Through the Chair, I'll just add, so there'll be two parts that we do this. We'll, if there has been an internal audit, you'll get an internal audit update within Tina's report. And then if there was actions arising from anything, you'll get an update of where those actions are and how do they fit. In terms of what the different parts of different projects, so there may be a separate section with the enterprise management system. You'll probably, as you're seeing, the insurance will have its own update, so you'll get that reported on that. And then the individual other updates of any audits that are outstanding or need to supplement our risk assessments through assurance may be as a separate report, so like health and safety, that they're legal. And so there'll be an overarching capture with both in the risk reporting framework, in the internal audit overarching of where internal audit processes are and actions outstanding. And if there are specific things that needs to have its own individual report, you will have that as well. So as Tina said, it's a little bit of all. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. No, primo. Thank you very much.
Essentially, I think also, if I can just interject there, Josh, meeting by meeting, we'll have those updates and relevant reporting when it's appropriate. That's what I'm hearing. Josh, you have other questions?
No, Pauline. Thank you very much, Pauline. Thank you very much, Tina.
Thank you, Josh. Riet.
Pauline or Tina, I'm taking you to page 31 of 83. I just wanted to ask a quick question, and it is more out of interest about what type of fringe benefit tax is available at council, because my understanding is that obviously we have vehicles like myself or some staff that part of your contract is that you can have, say, 100% or 75% or 50% personal use. I was just interested because to me also a fringe benefit tax is if your organisation give you discounted loans or superannuation contributions, or you can buy discounted goods. So I was just interested to know what else do we offer, or what other fringe benefit activities do we have at council aside just from checking vehicle use?
Through the chair, the majority of fringe benefit is the vehicle use, and that captures those that maybe have a direct linkage of having it for doing the work that they need to do, vehicle, but also if things are captured from using a pool as you like vehicle, they have to take it home because the next day they got an early start and they can't get access to it. So that's most of the expenditure, I would say 95%. There are certain other things that may come into it in terms of condition of employment, which may be medical insurance in some terms of employment with those. Again, that's not wholesale, but it is the minor parts of it. But mostly, as I say, fringe benefit is with the vehicles.
So you are saying that we do have some other areas that we do cover. I'm just interested because I do want us to yeah, no worries. Thanks, Pauline.
Yeah, when you're talking about the wider is, the do you give loans that are less than market rate, for argument's sake? No, we do not have those kind of schemes or anything like that. The only two parts that do come through is, as I say, the vehicles, the use of vehicles, and medical insurance for some that were a condition of employment.
Okay, and that is optional. That is not a, like you say, wholesale offer to all employees. That will be on an individual basis going forward. No, that's good. I just thought if we only do vehicles, maybe we should state in there we're looking at, for an organisation like a council, fringe benefit tax, like you might see it in a private organisation, is a little bit different. But no problem at all. Thank you. You've clarified it for me that there are some smaller sections that will be picked up by the broader FBG. Thank you, FBT.
Thanks, Riet. Pat? Pat, you're welcome to speak.
I thought I'd hit it, but it didn't. Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This question is not in the internal audit yet, but in light of a decision we made last week around climate change, maybe it is for the future. And the reason I raise it just now, Mr. Chairman, you're probably not aware, but the Gisborne District Council runs a weekly comment written by councillors about what's on this week. And so it was my turn to write the one this week. And I've had a call from someone who will be known to councillors and possibly is watching the call that says our audit paper, and he had looked at the whole paper, does not refer to climate change at all. And I've not been able to get back to him because I live outside of cell phone coverage. And the message was on my cell phone when I arrived this morning. So I'm really saying, and I would expect that it's something for the future, that now that council has taken a decision on that, which we took last week, on a degree of mitigation or level that we propose to get to, would one expect a report against our activities around climate change to appear in future internal audit reports? Or where could the public expect to see a comment from us against our audit of climate change activities?
The Chair, it is in our risk report. And our risk overarching report, it talks about that. It talks about when, in this particular report, it says what is the internal audit has been done and what have we done with those particular ones. And in regards to main things on focus, climate change wasn't on the topic. But if we are assessing something with regards to independent review of, say, roading, and that came through, then yes, of course, that would be included within the topics of the internal audit. But it is in the risk, it is in insurance, and anything that has specifically related to when they do cover things that it could be impacted of, it will be recorded in those reports.
Thank you. Through you, Bruce, too. Thank you, Ms. Foreman. I think that's the point, that he didn't see it as a specific item, but it is contained where it's relevant. But really what I'm saying, since we took quite a significant decision last week, are we likely, and I can get an answer another day, to then report against that determination to be carbon neutral by 2030? Our council office going to report against that as an item in internal audit?
Through the Chair, I guess it's an emerging risk. We have our strategic risks, which we have identified, and what we're actually trying to ascertain where we're sitting with that. And I believe now, as you said, we've reached a point of that, that's an emerging risk. And so we'll be reporting that as a separate item under the risk per se, and how we're doing and what we're tracking as well as a separate sort of identification, but it will be captured going forward.
Thank you very much.
I think it's a very good question, actually, without, and speaking at risk of not knowing quite the decision you've made, although I've got a sense of it, Pat. I think in terms of the climate change risk, and I think Steve's there on the line as well, it would make sense that as part of the mitigation, we think about how we report, because I think that's actually as important, that's important. Sorry, it's an important cog in the total climate change response. And even now, we, having considered the audit of the annual report, we should be reflecting how that commitment would be reflected through reporting in the annual report as well. So that's at the top end, but I think there's a lot more than that you're certainly hinting at, Pat. It would be well worth with the climate change strategic risk, that part of the mitigation as we work through what is the most effective and appropriate way and transparent way to report, Pauline. So thank you for that question, Pat.
And Mr. Chairman, just quickly, I certainly wasn't suggesting it should be there today.
No, I understand that.
It's a very recent decision, but I'm just following up on, and the individual will follow up with us, I'm sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Pat. Again, very helpful question. Look, just a couple of points from me, Tina, if that's okay. And look, partly it's a bit like the climate change. There's a couple of decisions here which clearly I'm not part of, shouldn't be part of, but actually I'm just interested in the implications. And so I've got a wee bit of look at the future focus, which is paragraph 31 onwards. Red, I like the question, by the way, about fringe benefit tax. We could say, and I've had it said before, what's the risk here? Is it that big that we should be spending money even on doing that review? My experience, and indeed talking with PwC out of interest, I have to be clear, modest interest here, is that actually it's the sort of thing that we don't focus on a lot. And I don't mean Gisborne, but I mean as the sector. and yet it's one of those small matters that can really pick us up because the penalties aren't actually non-punitive. So it's worthwhile having that check. Pauline, I would presume that when PW do their review, they would be starting from a position of what should be subject to fringe benefit tax. I think that would be useful because, Reid, I think it goes back to the core of your question: how does fringe benefit tax affect us as a council? And my assumption is that if they're doing an internal audit, their scope would include actually for all those transactions that should attract fringe benefit tax, do we have the appropriate accounting and accountability over those? So I look forward to that report when it comes back out, and that would help. I haven't been party to decision clearly around the ERP and ECM, but it sounds like a big project. These always are. Tina, can you just give me some sense about what is the overall control? Because what I'm hearing you say is that for the purposes of your resource, the time that you use and focus, this is going to be a big burner. So I'm just wondering if you just give me a quick sense, and the committee a quick sense of the overall control and size of this project, please.
I'm just going to be involved initially in phase 1. That's when the finance and HR modules will be implemented. So it's just part of the system configuration and the setup. So as a subject matter expert with another finance team member, we will be working with the entire project team and BAs to basically set up all of the different areas of finance to make sure all of the functionality is available that we have in our current system, hopefully with some extra add-ons, and that there's good internal controls in place that goes through the right workflows to the appropriate people for approvals, and that you can look at transactions and follow them back to see who initiated the transaction, and you can see the entire trail from start to finish. So there's auditable steps to see basically who's touched the screen and what they did to it. So having those internal controls in place is critical, so that we can follow transactions from start to finish. And when we have external auditors, we can verify and confirm all the figures where they came from, and the source documentation is available.
Brilliant. No, thank you for that. I wonder if my sort of larger question, James, Pauline, whether that's one that I should probably shoot your way, that we've got appropriate control over what is both dollar-wise, project-wise, and dare I say cultural-wise in the organisation, a really, really big project.
Yeah, through the chair, I can speak to that. So the Enterprise Solutions project is fully managed through our major projects environment. So we have monthly reporting, which has a full risk assessment associated with every step of that project that goes to core. It's got quite a lot of project planning around it, as you might imagine. It has a specific project manager, a specific change manager, and a pile of others that are involved in the project to ensure that we've got adequate controls as we work it through. It is a long-term project, and we're working with a vendor now that we've gone through an appropriate procurement process with. We've just completed the contract negotiations for that project with external legal resource to assist us with the requisite expertise. And yeah, the project's in its first phase, but I feel that we've got really good controls around it, particularly from an operational perspective.
Brilliant. And look, it is, your point's well made that it's largely operational. So I tread carefully here, James, with the next question. I'm not asking you about the contract negotiation, but what's the budget for this, and where does, as a major project, where does the visibility of it come to governance? Yeah, so we've planned appropriately for the budget through our annual plan and long-term plan processes. And the project itself is around the $5 million quantum. And we've had all the requisite sign-off at a governance level to move forward with that project. It's been in the pipeline for a while now, and I'm just so glad that it's finally underway, because we're currently working with a system that needs a bit of a spruce up, so to speak. Yes, one of the key things is to drive it through to the end so that it's done on time and in budget. I know that's an easy thing for me to say in governance, but actually it is the reality with these projects. So well done. Indeed. Josh, you had your hand up. Did you have a question or a comment you wanted to make?
Oh, I was actually going to interrogate it a little bit further, but James's answer was really, really good. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, because generally that was kind of where I was thinking in regards to asking about risk in terms of deliverability. You know what? But I think I know your questioning around controls was the more appropriate way to be able to drill down into that. I was wondering about expertise, about staff experience in regards to managing how big this was, etc. But I didn't want to delve down too deep. Wanted to still try to keep it to high level. But it was great. Thank you very much, Bruce. Thanks very much, James.
And James, obviously, it'll get a bit of focus from us because Tina, we were putting to us on her good work there, which is, as you say, Tina, part and parcel of the total project and total effort. But we'll keep our eye. Andy, you've got a question.
Yeah, just a little bit more on that. Being a long-term project, is the project vulnerable to the hyperinflation we're seeing in all our other projects, or is it kind of a little bit different?
That might be a question for Pauline. I think we're all exposed to some form of inflation risk where projects are concerned, and IT or IT-related projects are as susceptible to that as any other.
Chair, once I set the contract, it will be for the deliverable services with it. And so that as such will be agreed. But if, say, for argument's sake, things take longer, or any parts of that may be subject to inflation. But basically what you set for the contract will be on that basis. It will be the unforeseen that could be making, that could go additional costs because of inflation have captured that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Andy. I just want to remind us that obviously you're in deep contract negotiation right at the moment, James. So I just want us to be careful around the confidentiality of what you're trying to negotiate. But
those are complete. We've not long completed them. Yep, about a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, sweet. Okay, you're on the road. Okay, look, the other thing, sorry, just final comment from me is, Tina, I will be interested ultimately to see the 3-year internal audit program in direction. The last couple of years, I think the committee has noted quite rightly that it's been affected by COVID and a need for immediate response and needs, including also things like the government subsidy. So quite appropriate use and focus of the resource, but it wasn't necessarily where we were perhaps anticipating the plan might go. So there is an important piece, and I don't want to either take time necessarily today or indeed just really note and flag that actually is an important wee paragraph for at the end of the year, which will be the focus on where do we want to put our effort in terms of internal audit for the following 3 years, or at least plan where we want to put that effort. That'll be great. Look, are there any other questions, or can we move to the motion, please? So look, from the chair, I'll move that we just check what the full motion, but essentially I'll move from the chair that we note the contents of this report. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. Is there any discussion on the motion? There being none, I'd ask you to raise your hands if you agree with the motion, please. Any votes against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Can we move, probably David, to the health and safety update? And look, could I just note particularly the question under the actions items, really from Pat, where, if I'm correct, Pat, make certain I've got this correct, this is particularly around COVID and indeed the relationship with the community. I think was the key issue that you're after. And again, we'll get, David, if you could address that, that would be helpful, please. Or Nadine, anybody that needs to be talking on that would be fine, please.
Yeah, good morning, all. I think we've got Steve and James that might be there to help me with that point.
Brilliant.
But if I can take the report has been read, that's good. And through the chair, I'd like to just highlight a few things on that report before I go to that area that Pat raised. COVID is obviously an important part of everything at the moment. We've secured significant amounts of rat kits from Bay of Plenty, local area shared services. So we're well positioned to support staff going forward. Staff do need some support because there's a lot of people gone down with COVID at the moment. and their health and well-being is pretty important to us to support that. We have from the report, you will see that we've had an increase in violence, physical abuse to staff through council. That continues. It continued after this report was made. Generally with COVID-related compliance, I think it's fair to say. And we've just completed some online training, situational awareness training for some of our teams, which went down pretty well. Contractors, I'd like to acknowledge the support I've had from Dave Wilson and the team in relation to provision of dedicated health and safety components in some of the larger projects which involve multiple contractors. I think that's a really good key thing going forward, give me some more visibility and more support in relation to assurance and verification of contractors doing their work. That is summarised. Going back to the point that Pat made in relation to the support of the community in relation to the COVID, would James like to comment on that? Yep. Or Steve?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak.
Thanks,
to
James.
We actually are in a continuous cycle of review in terms of using MVPs or My COVID Passes at our facilities. We have a meeting scheduled for this Friday specifically to talk about that topic. It's interesting to see how others around the country, other councils are approaching it, and there is quite a mixed bag. You would have seen recently some councils have relaxed their approach to the use of My COVID Passes. We'll be taking a specific look at the risk assessment associated with using them in our facilities in a tairāwhiti context. So I use those terms intentionally, tairāwhiti context. You'll notice that around the country, people are reaching peaks at different times. Although it wasn't part of the meeting proper, you possibly would have heard a comment that tairāwhiti is currently experiencing per head capita across DHBs, some of the highest active cases of COVID at the moment. So that's currently where we stand. It's not a decision we take lightly, but it does require us to take a methodical approach in terms of understanding the risk. And what I wanted to say about the risk, and this is often where people get a little bit confused, and I'm not saying this is council, but it's certainly been my experience dealing with legoimas, is people tend to see it as a risk assessment of the vaccine. It's not. So council's risk assessment relates to the risk of COVID-19 infection and transmission at our venues and workplaces, and council's duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act arising in relation to taking reasonably practical steps to reduce the risk. So that's the assessment that we undertake in terms of the use or not of COVID passes.
Thank you. Josh, I see your hand up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hey, thanks for that kōrero, James. I was wondering if, actually I have some separate questions, but in regards to your point just there, it would be great if we're able to incorporate in that kōrero in the health and safety update in order to be able to have something for us as governors to hono to in order to be able to connect out and have those conversations out wider. I'll get to my questions. Actually, it's kind of interrelated as well too, because I wanted to, well, actually, first off, Safety Day, thank you very much for the report. Really awesome report. I did want to ask just a question around my, that I was firstly interested was about the makeup. So in 21C, you talk about our health and safety committees. I'm assuming that they're made up of the people that you mentioned in 25A, which is the part of the health and safety rep. Can you explain to me what our health and safety committees look like? Not the core, not the directors coming together to discuss health and safety, but our actual worker health and safety committees.
Absolutely, Josh. Good question. One of the key parts of the health and safety legislation is worker engagement, participation, and that is really key to us at council. So we have we've got around about 15 at the moment, individuals from different areas and hubs within the council that meet on a quarterly basis, but are active in health and safety throughout that 3 months. What we've tried to do is to get a 2-year period for health and safety representatives elected to get thoroughly trained over those 2 years and then moved aside, letting somebody else have the benefit of that training. So hopefully over a period of time, we get significant training and health and safety aware committees. They're involved in investigations, and they're given information on a regular basis, including these kind of updates, Josh. So they're active participants to help and support me throughout the council.
So that team of 15 is the committee that was referred to, like that. Okay, awesome.
Correct.
In regards to employee participation into feeding into our health and safety work plan or whatever, how high are the rates of engagement of our staff? Do you have a percentage? Is there a really good feed-in kind of early? And so I guess those, it's the lead stuff for health and safety, right? Like, is there high engagement in regards to those employee participation things?
I think it's good. I think it could be better. We do a lot of emphasis on the initial health and safety induction to encourage people to actually report and to have an active participation in health and safety. It's true to say that some people come really fully engaged with health and safety, some not so. But it's an ongoing area for me to improve and develop that worker engagement.
Awesome, thanks, Dave. And my last question. Sorry, James, did you want to add? Oh, still on mute, Yahua.
Mute, don't you love it? Just through the chair, just wanted to add to that. I think in terms of health and safety culture, we have a really good tone set from the top. So CORE has it as a standard agenda item on every CORE meeting. So it's a part of what we live and breathe at the council. The other thing I wanted to make mention of in terms of the health and safety representative committee is that there's representatives from across our work sites, which I think is really, really good. So you have got rep from the library and people from Bank Street, etc. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and from a cultural perspective, my experience having worked in council for a number of years is that I've seen GDC really take a front forward approach and making sure we've got boots on the ground, etc. So I think the system and the culture is it's a continuous cycle of improvement, but I think the tone is set really well. We've got good systems and great people like Dave leading the charge as well to support our diverse teams in terms of the activities that they undertake.
Thank you, James. Just two more points that I wanted to ask about the Mr. Chair. One is around, my next one is linked to what James was talking about before in regards to worker health and safety, around rationale around vaccine passes, but wider than that, I wanted to ask about staff wellbeing and mental health. I know that we have obligations under the Health and Safety Act around staff wellbeing and mental health. Is that, because it wasn't really reported to in here, it is indicated that it is one of the key areas of risk or top identified operational risk. Is there a plan on reporting about that in the next audit and risk committee? Because from a personal perspective, I would have thought that with the COVID stuff going on, with the conflict, violence, and aggression stuff that our staff are faced with, that would also have some congruency here and probably should have been reported in this report. That's just my personal perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting, Josh. Wellbeing can sometimes be quite difficult to report on as such, but what I can do is speak to the system that we've got in place. So we obviously do have a number of staff impacted, both in terms of positive cases and household contacts across the organisation. We've set up a working group effectively that, and I will add that we have set up an internal contact tracing system. So whilst the government's given up on that, we haven't. We think it's really important to keep connected with our staff, both in terms of their wellbeing and any support that they require. Thankfully, the health response in Tairāwhiti has been really good, and that's been some of the commentary that we've had from staff, and a lot of people have got a lot of whānau support. So I've had direct contact with 50 odd people over this process myself, and a team, but I've made a point of reaching out and ensuring that our staff are as best as they can be. It's a very tough time that people are experiencing, and it's that in terms of wellbeing, we've had staff that have had mild impacts and literally worked through, chose to, and we've had other staff whose experience hasn't been that great, and we're making sure that we're pivoting to ensure that our response across the board is proportional to the type of wellbeing experience that people are having. Obviously, the business continuity front is interesting as well, because if you get a staff impacted in terms of people being impacted by COVID and having to take time off, then obviously you've got that workload spread. But we've put mitigations in place, such as rostering, and such as, you know, making sure that people have got all the tools and all the support that they require, and ensuring that what I say to people and what I encourage is working remotely does not mean you have to be remote. So connecting with people is a really important part of that process, and I think we're doing quite well in that space. Overall, our response from the very first lockdown set a tone around being compassionate and kind and understanding people's personal circumstances. So that's the approach we've taken throughout.
Awesome, thanks, James. And my last thing is less of a question and more of a comment. I think it's really important as a committee that is responsible for health and safety of our organisation. I think it's important for us to get boots on the ground, to be able to see these processes and these systems in action. I mean, the Act actually calls that, the Act actually asks that of us as responsible governors. So once we kind of get past this virtual space, and I'm only speaking personally, and I'll put it out to the rest of the committee, I think it'll be great for us to actually get boots on ground, to be able to get eyes on to some of these really good systems that I see you reporting on. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Josh. Very, very good point about the last point, particularly about eyes on. I think that's a key part to the legislation, isn't it? Pat, thank you. And then after Pat, Larry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to thank you for the comment with respect to reviewing the status on Friday, I think was James has said. It's just because it is of interest to our community. I have a couple of questions from page 43 and 44, and it's been touched on with respect to their threats and violence towards our staff, and that this is showing 61 in this report, and I understand it's been commented on that it's continued post the date of this report, and that staff have been given some additional training. I mean, we won't be the only local government entity that suffers this, but is there anything that that other entities might have discussed with you? Is there potential to have the police involved more frequently? Because it's inexcusable for people to be so offensive to council officers during the course of their work. And we do understand the public potentially feel threatened or more stressed than normal through COVID. But at the end of the day, a society has to function, and council officers are simply doing their job. So has CORE thought about what other resource or skill set or potential can be put in place to protect this? Because it's just going on and getting worse. So that's my first question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. Before we implemented the My Vaccine Pass requirement, our facilities, we actually made sure that we had extra security in place. So we have external security assisting staff. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that we maintain a very close relationship with our local police. And if their services are required, then we engage them to do so. It's just unfortunate that we have had, and I think it'll be fair to comment, I'm going to say it because I think it's true in terms of patterns of behaviour. We did see a spike, particularly around the time of the protests in Wellington. So I think there was an atmosphere created where people felt a bit more entitled to do things. And so we had a week in particular where I was quite surprised at the level. So hopefully that'll wane, and we've still got security working at site, at the pool and at the library and our front counter, just to ensure that we've got the requisite skills and resources there to assist staff as well.
Thank you, James. And that would have been post this report, the weeks of the Wellington exercise, weren't they? So that will be reported next time, as you've said. It's continuing. The only other question I have in the paper, Mr. Chairman, and I'm just wondering about whose responsibility is it, and it's quite a contentious issue in the district. There's the very last bullet point on page 44, someone sustained an injury jumping into the harbour. To what degree is that Gisborne District Council's health and safety issue, and to what degree is it the port's? And it's not actually our facility, and we council through the ratepayer does make a considerable contribution to endeavouring to keep people safe there. So can someone expand on that for me? Thank you.
Shall I take that? Well, shall I take that one? I think I'm probably forearmed to actually answer that one, Pat. It comes under section 34, which is overlapping duties, where who has got the influence over the risks that are generated. In the situation where we've actually acknowledged or put in a jumping platform, we've actually encouraged kids to jump there. We need to do a thorough risk assessment, but we also need to work with other parties, and that might be the Coast Guard, that might be Eastland Port and Council, get together to understand the risks and to actually make sure they are controlled, those risks. So everybody's got an overlapping duty in that situation where we need to consult, cooperate and coordinate activities to ensure the safety of people using those facilities.
I mean, thank you very much for that. And supplementary, I mean, and I don't need an answer today, but did we feel can we have it reported to us, because it does come at a cost to the ratepayers, whether the support mechanism put in place around the jumping was successful or useful or protected kids, whichever way we want to look at it, because they do use that jumping platform and the wharf, whether it's a platform or not, well beyond the period that we had any kind of supervision. So could we perhaps have something reported to us in the next report about the success and potentially the value, I guess, of the mechanism that was put in place last summer?
So Pat, I would love to, Bruce, if I can comment on this, I would love to, because I was involved in a meeting after this report was written, Pat, with the port and with our Māori wardens, what is going on there, and you will see a change there, and I will update Dave as well about that the port will be taking some action there to make it a safer spot, because there has been several issues there that we are so well aware of. So that is something that has been constantly discussed, because it is such a big health and safety issue there. And I also spotted the laceration on the foot here at the bottom of the page and thought, wow, are we also in charge of that? So thank you, Dave, for also updating us on that. But there is a lot happening in that space in the last few days, Pat, and it will definitely be updated and reported on very soon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Riet, and thank you, Pat, for that question. So, David, even if it's just a summary, it seems like as an action point, it will be good that we, as a committee, return to this at the next meeting, not to delay the action and the immediate stuff that you've talked about, Riet. Larry, is there a question you've got to make?
Yeah, I've got a couple of ones, just a couple of queries actually. On page 39, sorry, number 16, where it does identify an asbestos, historical asbestos containing materials on Titirangi. Is that a threat to the public at the moment, or whereabouts is this on Titirangi? Because that hasn't been reported through any other medium at all. So that's my first question.
I can respond to that one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Through
you, the chair. So the asbestos is located outside of the area that's easily accessible on Titirangi. So it's a new area that the fire team were looking at to potentially develop a nursery site. So we're just working with them on that. But the asbestos was located and is currently being assessed. So we will have more information to come back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. The next one is on page 41, item number 23, and it's about several infringement fines in retail and hospitality trades ranging from 4,000 to 12,000 for non-compliance. And I guess this is over COVID. Can I get a bit of a more of a breakdown on that? They're quite serious fines, and it would be nice to know what they were for.
Yeah, I can answer that one, Larry. It's working with previously with WorkSafe. I still have contacts there. their focus has been more in under COVID, actually about the COVID compliance. These are primarily retail shops where they've actually not had the QR code scanner on the door. They've not been following processes as outlined in the WorkSafe guidance. So it's generally retail stores, but other organisations that are not following those prescribed requirements under the COVID legislation. But they are significant fines, as under Health and Safety at Work Act. The fines are getting a lot more expensive.
Yeah, sure. So in those situations, there was no, it wasn't publicised at all. I mean, I just refer back to a restaurant in Christchurch where it was all over the media because they didn't comply as well, and they were exposed publicly. And these ones I haven't heard any of at all publicly. So they're under the radar and going to stay under the radar.
Yeah, I believe so. I think there's a lot of them. A plethora have been prosecutions and fines. So yeah, I think they're under the radar, Larry.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the paper, David. I think it reflects exactly what I've been keen to do, which is and appreciate members that you've focused both on systems as well as also events, which becomes important. And Josh, I'm reminded by your comment that particularly back together, there's a level of verification, eyeballing that we need to do. So that's really superb. I've appreciated the report, and members, thank you for your questions because I think it has broadly covered them. I just wanted to ask just one question. Therefore, at the end here, David, which was just we already talked about CORE doing its regular meetings, and I'm very appreciative, Nadine, that your team take this seriously. I think that's important to the total tone in the organisation. At paragraph 9, we talked about a list of 28 critical risks, and it looks like you've ticked off the last one in terms of the picture. What's the relationship of those 28 critical risks to the list of 12, the top 12, or sorry, the top 10 that we have in paragraph 12? Are they part of those 28 and therefore ongoing review, or is it a separate list?
That was a separate list, Bruce. Those are the ones I initially found when I started work with the GDC about the things that stuck out like a sore thumb. 28 of them that needed doing. We just finished off those. The 12 are the critical risks that are ongoing: the conflict, violence and aggression, the remote lone work, the driving. Absolutely different. Yeah.
So, like, state the obvious. Obviously, CORE focus is focused on the almost your quick wins, if I can call it that. Although you might want to suddenly add a jumping board or a diving board or something to that as well now from the discussion. But obviously, these top 10 are ones that are the ongoing focus of the weekly meetings of CORE over health and safety, right?
Yeah. And any trends that have highlighted any reports. Yeah.
The other thing I'll go for is I won't ask who like me had to go to Google, but who knows what a pollux is? It's the second last bullet point in the report. I had to go and Google what pollux means. So I'll let you do that if you don't know. I'm not being medically trained, so there we go. Look, are there any other questions folk have on this very helpful paper? Thank you, David, sorry. Are there any other points? There being none, can I, again, probably for ease, move from the chair that we note the contents of the report? Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Pat. So look, I will, please raise your hand if you move or agree with the motion, please. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Can we, look, I would like us to take a break, but I had 10:30 in my head as a potential for a 5-minute. Could I just suggest that we try and deal with the insurance renewal and then we take a short break? Are people comfortable with that? Yeah, no thumbs up, but we'll say that's the right thing. So we can move to insurance renewal, please. That would be great. Is Andrew on the line? Is Andrew going to speak to this, or is somebody else?
I can just give Andrew can. I'll just give a little bit of an update, and again, if there's any other technical things, Andrew will be able to come in and answer those. So basically, this is in 3 parts, this paper. It talks about the insurance renewal process and what do we cover, what is not covered, and is there anything different than what we've had in the past. And the one thing is, as we know, we have increased the wreck removal cover from 5 million to 10 million. So that's one of the other changes. The second part that it discusses, it said, we adopted an insurance strategy in September, and this is an update of where those critical actions that were outstanding with that, where are we up to, and what do we need to be mindful of, and how are we incorporating that into our overall insurance assessment. And the third thing is an update of the process going forward, where we're having ongoing meetings with the port, understanding sort of the liabilities, or what do we have in place for that protection for that running. But I'll take it as read, and again, Andrew will be able to come in if there's any other technical things or any other things that you might have with it.
Thank you for that heads up, Pauline, including noting the last item around the port, which was an open action item from our last meeting. Members, do we have questions or comments at this stage to either address to Pauline or indeed Andrew? Yes, Larry.
Yeah, just a quick one on page 62 about vehicles. All vehicles are insured. Rural vehicle, except for rural vehicles and tankers. Do I take it that that is done on a national scale through the rural fire entity, or is there another reason why those vehicles aren't insured?
Pauline, can you?
I think, yeah, I'll just with it. So just because Andrew hasn't got the actual page numbers as such, but that attachment 2 on page 62 was all vehicles except the rural fire tankers, etc. That we don't have those anymore. It's rural fires as a separate one.
Yeah, right.
With it.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Pat?
Thank you. My question was around public liability on our forestry assets, and I can't see, and landowners who have forestry assets generally have public liability in case of fire that might spread to other people's property. And I noticed public liability further through the document, but I couldn't see whether we've got any comment around whether we have public liability over our forestry assets. Thank you.
Okay, you want
to the chair, I can answer that question. Basically, our largest forest is Wainaki, or the other name Pamoa. That is the JV with Jukin, and it is Jukin that takes responsibility for the insurance for that forest. And then our other large crown forest is Wairangi Kuri, and again we take public liability insurance for that on behalf of the Crown. We then have other small woodlots around the council, around the district. There are only 60 hectares in total, and we have those covered as well.
Thanks very much. Can we just refer to the page where we talk about public liability? I don't think it talks about forests in there.
No, through the chairs, that's a different policy. So yes. There's a different, and they take the different policies for different things. And so if there's a forestry one, we take it over for the forestry, and public liability is a separate coverage.
Thank you. So thank you. Through the chair, where would I find that, if you don't mind my asking?
In terms of the forestry cover, is that what you would like?
Well, just in terms of public liability cover for fire and forestry, because it does talk about fire on attachment 1 on page 58, and it talks about material damage excluding fire, but only because I'm aware of it personally and how we cover it, I couldn't find it recorded here.
We can give you an update at the next on the action and say where it's included, but it should be under the forestry one.
It does, and it would possibly be, just through you, Mr. Chairman, just be a couple of additional words in the block under forestry, which again appears on page 58, and maybe it just needs, because it talks about the forestry being the fire to the forest, but it does say nothing about public liability beyond the actual forestry block. So if we could just have that made more clear, that would be helpful. Thank you.
And if we
Thanks,
could just
Mr. Chairman.
if we just treat that as an action item, please, I'd appreciate that. Pauline, I would like to suggest, Pat, it's not an inconsistent question from you. If I can be honest, if there's an answer, I'd like to see that to Pat before the next meeting. I'd like to see it reported at the next meeting, but I assume that you'll go back to Pat as soon as possible. Andy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, let's direct 2023 and going forward, because it speaks of the year a tad retrospectively being November 21 to October this year. So, you know, we're already well down that sort of timeline.
Yeah, there is a lag timeline with regards to getting insurance schedules. They have to have where you cover for the current financial year. And unfortunately, our insurance schedules goes from November to October. So that encompasses over 2 financial years. And so there is a lag period in getting that information, and we have to give significant information out to the market beforehand. So while we catch up in terms of some of the direction, that's where it flows through. But yes, there is a lag period.
Thank you.
Andy, can I pick up your point? Because I think it's actually a really important point, and that's the importance of the second part of what Pauline has raised for us, which is the strategy. And so, Pauline, I appreciate the responses that you've got in here against that strategy, but that's, Andy, to me, really important that we have regular updates on the progress on that strategy, because it's got some critical bits of work that actually we've agreed, in effect with Aon as well, around maximum probable loss, etc. And those are important as we look to the next renewal settings for the 22-23 year. And so I think there's actually, and there should be, as we've got it now set up, a formal structure for the way in which that comes back to this committee, and it should be scheduled for prior to the 22-23 year, because there are some actions on that strategy which are really important. And I think if I got picked it up correctly, Andrew, most of them are to do, but there's a very logical things to do, which should also be important to the renewal, because actually it's raising the questions of what is the smart way for us to cover our risk, which of course includes the natural question, what risk should we cover ourselves and how? So Pauline and Andrew, I take it that we'll get an ongoing update on that strategy with a view that we have a chance to input prior to the next renewal.
Through the chair, yes, it is. Where insurance, you used to have a yearly report of what was the insurance market, what did we cover, and what were the impacts of that. This is, we've adopted an insurance strategy now, and as you can see, that there are a number of things that are required to be done, and so that requires an ongoing reporting update of where we're at and what are the impacts of that. So definitely will be reported regularly.
And look, just to conclude the phases of reporting that you've talked about, which Andrew, obviously you've done some work with the port, and I characterise it, and you can tell me if I've got it right or wrong, but in essence, the port looks after the things that most worries it, which is a wreck that may or may not be impeding its particular operation. Outside of that, it's really saying it's up to us. We carry the majority of the liability, and probably then the wisdom of the increasing of the premium, and part of our mitigation is your ongoing discussion with them around movement. But in essence, there's a strong sense here that if something big happens, we're probably largely on our own. Have I overcharacterised that or got it wrong even?
To the chair, that is correct. When we had this meeting with Eastland Port, and we had our 2 insurers join the meeting to enable any difficult questions to be answered, it is definitely clear that Eastland Port have a wreck removal cover for their business interruption should a ship go into the dock or something like that. It is definitely the council's responsibility as the last person standing should anything occur.
Thank you, Andrew. It's sobering, that advice, but thank you for finding that one out. Pat, and then Riet.
Thank you. Just a supplementary, and it's a really good paper, lots of information. But just to be clear then, and the question came from queries from Councillor Cranston, the 1.3 mil, is that the levy for 21-22, and do we pay it, say, quarterly? I mean, I imagine we can't get away with paying nothing until the end. So is that 21-22?
Through the chair, it's from November 21 to October 22. So it's mostly in the next year, and we have to pay the whole lot up front.
So we paid it last year in October.
It's due, you have to pay it at the renewal of it.
Fine. Yep, no, fine. And I did hear you say it was an October to November year, but I wasn't quite sure when the premium was paid. Thank you very much.
Riet?
I cannot find what I'm looking for, so I can't find the page, but I'm just going to speak to it. So for me, when I look at insurance in my personal life, but also for business, it is for those big ticket items that you don't really want to happen. So we were worried about this issue. I'm much more relaxed now that I know that more the roles set out and that there are constant communication between the port and us and insurance. Because the bit that I can't find that I read somewhere here, and Andrew, you might need to update me, but the job of our harbour master is to make sure ships do not come into our territorial water if they do not have appropriate insurance. So that is level one, where we check if we allow someone to come into our waters, they have appropriate insurance. Then if everything goes wrong and we are the last man standing, at least we make sure we tick those boxes to make sure people coming into our water are covered, and we're talking with our partners, but if worse comes to worse, we do have appropriate cover. Is that correct?
To the chair, we increased our wreck removal cover from $5 to $10 million.
Yeah.
Is it the responsibility of the harbour master? I'm not sure about the insurance component. We talked about that in our meeting, and it was Eastland Port require all small ships. So those are the launches, the fishing vessels. They don't, they said not many other things come in. They must carry insurance and is cited. The larger ships, they put it on to the actual agents in New Zealand. So it is the agent that provided some documentation to us in the meeting that it's got the ship's insurance. Now, under the Maritime Act, it states that all ships entering New Zealand must carry insurance. But as we know, there's insurance in insurance.
Yeah.
So we
Thanks, Andrew. I did find it, page 44 and 54.
Yes.
Thank you. But thank you for the clarification and what liability sits where, and also who checks what. But in the end of the day, if, like you say, we get insurance and we get insurance, at least we know we have appropriate cover, but there are also other barriers to stop us from being in that position in the first place. But thank you anyway.
Thank you. Pauline, were you going to add or to the comment, or are you fine?
No, Andrew answered it, and I was just going to point where the pond, so it's been asked and answered.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Red, for that question of clarification. It actually is really important. So, Andrew, thank you for this. It's been on our watch list for a couple of meetings now, so I do appreciate the fact that you've followed through with Eastland, and in fact it's given rise to dare I say it, perhaps a slightly broader relationship with them, which I think remains really important. It does reflect a difficult position for council when, yet again, for this sort of matter, it's last person standing, which is difficult. So I'd certainly would be keen that through you, we know we've got active monitoring of this risk, given it's one that we effectively live with the port every day. So thank you for that. Folk, is that the questions that we've got for the insurance renewal report?
I'm happy to move it, Bruce.
Thank you, Riet. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Josh. Appreciate that. So we Riet moves, Josh seconds that we note the contents of the report. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Could I suggest, as I hinted, that we take a 5-minute break? It's 22. Are people happy to be back on board at 1:45? Brilliant. Okay, let's do that. Suggest that you mute and video off, and we'll see you back in 5. Thank you for that. We've got one final remaining item in open, which is the strategic risk management report. So I wonder if we could, Steve, if you're there, if you could give us a snapshot of the salient points.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Chair. The report itself is continuing to bring into the reporting framework all of the Council's 13 strategic risks. There are a number still to come into this reporting framework, and I'll speak to that further into this response. In particular, with this report, we have 3 of the strategic risks that are currently outside of Council's risk appetite. All 3 have been assessed as major, and our risk appetite is to have risks at moderate or below. These risks: people and capability, finance and natural environment. I'll talk to each individually. With people and capability, the assessment of major really is a function of the level of staff turnover as defined in our risk appetite. So we have a current turnover at 21%, which is above our moderate level of between 15 and 17%. And as such, that puts it into the major level, and actions are underway, as has been reported separately to Council, to bring this risk back within Council's risk appetite. That is to get it to moderate or lower if possible. A consequence of this broader organisational people and capability risk is the knock-on effect, particularly for our natural environment risk. And again, this has been assessed as major given the emerging people and capability resourcing issue in that area of Council's service delivery. And as advised, this is being addressed through the wider people and capability risk management approach. With regard to finance, the risk is considered major when there is a 25 to 40% difference in budget and or an impact of between $500,000 and $2 million. The report is not suggesting that we are experiencing that risk event currently, but we are assessing it as being major given the heightened sense of uncertainty as a result of a number of factors. First up, the potential impact of the Three Waters reform, and that may have on our treasury risk and cash flow. We're currently experiencing rising interest rates and inflation, and associated with that, we are experiencing supply chain disruption, and there is the potential for further COVID-related disruption to supplies. So this means that management are working to ensure we continue to deliver within budget and avoid a major financial impact, hence the assessment as major, that we take a prudent approach to managing our finances, that we don't actually incur a risk event. So that's a short summary of the current risk status across the risks reported. With regard to those that are still to come into the framework, work is ongoing there, and I do need to make reference to the earlier discussion around climate change. I think that is an important working example of the process that management is going through to determine how best to manage this risk from a council perspective. As councillors will recall, we had climate change identified in our workshops last year as sitting within the risk of the impact of external change. There is potentially a case here to bring it more into the natural environment risk, or to potentially have it as a standalone risk. And management are currently working through the process to determine how best to report on this particular risk. And key to that will be having the clarity around the definition of what the actual risk event is that we're seeking to manage. So that is an example of the type of work that is being undertaken with those risks still to come into the framework. And without predetermining an outcome, I would anticipate that the climate change or climate crisis risk itself will come into this report in the future. I also need to talk to the internal audit plan that is part of this risk framework. We've had the previous internal audit report, and I'll continue to work with our internal audit team to bring forward this internal audit program as part of the strategic risk reporting. It's a little bit of a two-step. We need to get our risks defined and assessed and reported on, that we can then determine what components need to come through into the internal audit program. So that is work that's ongoing, and I anticipate that within the next 6 months, we will have this internal audit program up and back to this committee for your comment and approval.
Thanks for that, Steve. That's very helpful. And what I wanted to perhaps reflect here is well done to staff getting us to the workshop last year, because here we're starting to see particularly the definition of risk appetite as being powerful in terms of escalating issues or sorry, not necessarily issues, but highlighting risks, which, as you say, Steve, are outside our tolerance level. And for which obviously, clearly, I'm glad to hear there's already been obvious communication with council, which is really important. So at this stage, do we have members' questions for Steve or indeed management? Yes, Larry, and then Andy.
Yeah, thank you for that, Steve, and yeah, thank you for a great report. Mentioning climate change risk and environmental risk, there's obviously so much similarity to the two. Where would be the crossover between one and the other? Yeah, I mean, climate change, the risk is major weather events and fires and all the things that we would associate with climate change, but they are environmental as well. So yeah, that's for the, if you've got two different categories, where's the separation?
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, this is where further work is being done to define or better define the risk event relevant to each. So what are we clear about the definition of a risk event for our natural environment risk? And equally, do we have a clear definition of a risk event as it relates to climate change? So that's the piece where we will be working out whether they are separate risks or whether they are in effect one and the same. Another element to this assessment will come down to what kind of controls, therefore actions, we put in place to prevent either risk event from happening. However, if that risk was to occur, what are the mitigation actions we would take to minimise the impact? And again, that's where I believe there will be a degree of separation between the two. Some of the issues around climate change are beyond council's control. However, what is within our control, and therefore what are reasonable and practical actions council itself can take across both risks to, number one, avoid or prevent the risk event from happening. But if it was to occur, how do we minimise the impact and consequence?
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Larry. Andy?
Yeah, thanks. Item 16 on page 69 states we're using contracted personnel and consultants where possible to maintain service delivery. The capacity of this resource must also be challenged. What's the assessment of the capacity to maintain business as usual or better, with a view of what is the capacity of contracted personnel and consultants?
I'll go through the chair. That assessment, and I guess that's there's two things: is what do we need to do the work, and how do we make sure that we've got the work? And if we haven't got the resources internally, then another resource is to say, do we have to do that by getting external contact? So one of that is a function of have we got the staff to do it, and if we haven't, how do we actually get it done? So that is at the point of where it occurs, and as we go on, there may be some functions that there are specialties that you would only engage by professional services, because it's not to have a person, a full FTE to do that. So there's different elements associated with it. I'm not sure if I've completely answered your question.
Yeah, I guess the question really is, when you have determined that you do need that outside resource, is it readily available?
I wonder if I could contribute perhaps a broader sector view. Andy, there's a bit of irony here that in fact the consulting firms are reasonably well staffed at the moment, because that's a destination point for some of our staff.
Yeah.
That's particularly true at the moment in engineering, and some of the influences are things like the consulting firms have been staffing up. So they've been offering some pretty attractive salaries, and also some of the unsettling nature of the Three Waters reform particularly has affected a large proportion of the sector's staffing. So look, Nadine, Pauline, you folk could probably comment on whether this is a reality for Gisborne. But yeah, as I say, the irony is that actually consulting firms tend to be a bit of a destination for staff. So consequently, their biggest impact is probably staff taken out by COVID, not by not having enough staff to do the work. But there may be other factors which, I suspect you've talked about more broadly at Gisborne playing a part there. But it does mean that on the whole, contracting staff are available.
Yeah, just probably answer, and Joe, I can see, is probably listening in the background. There are probably two areas would be financial, because there is a shortage. There is obviously the strategic planners when we're doing our work with TRMP, and probably some of the things with resource consents. In terms of financial and impacts of using additional sources with outside firms to supplement if we can't get vacancies, there is definitely a tightening of the availability of doing that. And for us, in order doing some of our annual report work, we've had to use Napier as opposed to going locally, because there wasn't the ability to resource those things that are here. But I can pass over to Jo, and she can say how is she managing those kind of resource components for her major project going forward.
Hi, Jo, and welcome to the meeting. Thank you.
Morena tātou. So in terms of the Resource Management Act review we have underway, what we've done is establish a supplier panel of consultants. So we have 6 different consultants that we have contracts with that we can use on an ongoing basis. So it was a lot of investment in procurement upfront, but it's now streamlined what is an 8-year project in terms of accessing those resources, and it's also enabled those consultancies to know what their forward work program could look like and invest in additional capacity as well. I would say that prices do seem to have increased across the board, which probably reflects the demand, so the supply and demand tension. And we are finding that although we have the supplier panel on board, there is still a lag. You know, some are still busy for the next 3 months or so. But we're doing our best to forward, you know, plan our work program so they know what's coming, so they can be prepared.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Pat, you've got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the report, and I appreciate the detail and the honesty, but I would just like us to follow up on the people and capability and the mitigations, which must be referred to. But I'm happy if we take that in the in-committee part of the meeting, which we're going to have shortly.
Yes.
Because moving to 21% is actually a significant movement when we've been hovering just below 20. So, Mr. Chairman, if you're happy to do that, I'll ask my question then.
Yes, I'm happy for that to occur, because I think it's probably at a good appropriate place. And in a similar vein, I recognise, Pauline, that the finance risk, and I think you've defined it, Steve, in terms of our appetite is 25 to 40% outside our intended position. And it obviously puts pressure on us as we deal with the annual plan, which isn't directly the responsibility of this committee, but that must make it that way. Best of luck.
Bruce, I had a second question.
Oh, sorry.
I want to be really clear, having been the person that raised the climate change issue earlier, and looking at the natural environment, I completely understand what they're referring to, and I don't think that we should necessarily muddy the two. And I totally support the comment made by one of council officers earlier that the principle is that some events are beyond our control. My concern, and it will be reported to Audit, I'm sure, is the decision that council took last week to bring forward from a recommendation of council officers of a 2040 net carbon zero to 2030, and that is a risk issue for council and the cost of that, achieving that. And I think council officers would want to report that to us. So I just want to make it clear that I do see those two type of reports quite separate from the natural environment, where we are talking about our ability to do business as we're expected. And I note that Ms. Montgomery is on the call, that fall into our monitoring and resourcing department, resource consents and monitoring, and that's a challenge for us at the moment too. But I don't see that the climate report that I was asking about as the same thing. I just want to make that really clear. I think we're talking about two different things.
Thank you for offering that comment, Pat. I would probably endorse that. Well, I do endorse that in the way that I've read the papers. So I would certainly see them as separate as well.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions at this stage? Obviously, Steve's back for PX, and thank you, Pat, for signalling the point you'll raise or points you'll raise at that time. Any other points people would like to make? Steve, thank you again for a thorough report and informative, and sometimes I think informative reports can never be done justice, but I do appreciate the quality of the report. It's great.
I'll move receipt of the report.
Sorry, thank you, Pat.
I'll move receipt of the report.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Thank you, Larry. I'll put the motion in. Please raise your hands. Those in favour. Those against? It's carried. Thanks a lot. Can I move to the final item in open, which is the resolution to exclude the public for items 11, 1 and 2 for the reasons that are stated. I'll move from the chair this motion. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Josh. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. I wonder if we could just get